Well, I think they know we've seen each other before, dear.
Don Johnson spent decades running from the one relationship that mattered most, building a career on stubble and swagger while the woman who first saw him at 14 waited in the wings. Fame found him, addiction nearly destroyed him, and success gave him everything except the one thing he kept walking away from. Years after their second divorce, after remarrying someone else and building the stable life he'd always claimed to want, friends say he still carries the weight of what he lost. The name he's finally willing to say out loud isn't the teacher who saved him or the icon who elevated him, and the reason why cuts deeper than anyone watching from the outside could have guessed. Flat Creek, Missouri gave Don Johnson a teenage mother, a barely older father, and a childhood he'd later describe as interesting on the surface but rotten underneath. Abuse and absence left scars that followed him for decades, shaping a kid who learned early that nothing stayed solid for long. When his father's farming failures pushed the family to Wichita, Kansas, steady work at Boeing brought income but not comfort, and the four Johnson kids grew up packed into a one-bedroom project house that his parents' rising careers never quite lifted them out of. The real damage wasn't poverty, though. It was psychological, a tension Johnson didn't understand at the time but would later credit for pushing him toward something creative. His parents' divorce at 11 sent him spiraling, and bad behavior landed him in front of a juvenile judge who shipped him off to live with his dad. That move introduced hunting, fishing, and structure, but also the crushing responsibility of being the oldest kid expected to help provide. And at 16, he walked away from all of it. High school graduation in 1967 pointed him toward the University of Kansas theater program, but quitting after 1 year and heading west to San Francisco's American Conservatory Theater proved smarter. Proximity to Los Angeles meant proximity to opportunity, and by 1970 he'd landed his first film role in The Magic Garden of Stanley's Sweetheart, alongside Academy Award nominee Martin Pole. For a moment, Johnson believed he'd made it. The feeling didn't last. Films like Zachariah and Return to Macon County kept him working but stuck, grinding through forgettable projects that barely registered with audiences or casting directors. Then came The Herod Experiment, and on that set he met Melanie Griffith. She was 14, the daughter of his co-star Tippi Hedren, and the age gap raised eyebrows even in the anything-goes atmosphere of 70s Hollywood. Their first real conversation happened in a stairwell at the old Anheuser-Busch estate while the crew prepped the next shot, and for Griffith it was instant. She later described him as the most beautiful person she'd ever seen. Johnson saw her differently too, unusually sharp and mature compared to women he'd dated before. But he hesitated at first, questioning whether pursuing someone so young made any sense. That hesitation burned off fast. Soon he found himself picking up his girlfriend from high school, waiting outside the gates and feeling strange about how it looked. When Griffith got expelled from Catholic school at 15 for challenging religious teachings, she moved directly into his Hollywood rental. They lived together for years before splitting in 1975. But about a year later, everything imploded in dramatic fashion when Johnson received an emotional early-morning call from Griffith while out with former Miss World Marjorie Wallace. Both declared their love over the phone, caught a flight to Las Vegas by morning, and married before the day ended. The impulsive reunion brought no stability, and Griffith later admitted the marriage wasn't born from happiness, but desperation. Two people who couldn't make it work but felt unable to walk away. Johnson confessed he'd been with Wallace the night before and only left after Griffith's call, messy and clearly unsustainable. Meanwhile, his career finally showed life when A-Boy and His Dog earned him the 1975 Saturn Award for Best Actor, validation that came with serious pressure he wasn't prepared to handle. Recognition unsettled him, and by the late 70s, alcohol and drugs became the way he coped, partying that turned into dependence and then full addiction. Johnson later described his mindset as reckless and extreme, going as hard as possible the moment cameras stopped rolling until the lifestyle stopped feeling fun and started feeling like a trap. After separating from Melanie, Johnson cycled through relationships with Lynn Whitfield, Tanya Tucker, and Patty D'Arbonville in quick succession, restless and unfocused. Meeting Patty in 1981 at Andy Warhol's factory during a photo shoot for Interview magazine stopped him cold. She was standing naked on a table, and magnetic enough that when they ran into each other later at a Los Angeles restaurant, Johnson arrived with Tucker but left with Patty. When she became pregnant with Jesse, his first child, fatherhood forced him to confront himself in ways he never had before. Patty described him as beautiful and talented but completely out of control, and just before she walked away he admitted he needed help and committed to change. Rehab went smoothly, and he kicked his habits in 45 days with Patty's guidance, something that felt like a miracle to both of them. Sobriety didn't fix his career, though, and by the early 80s, casting directors saw him as a relief pitcher brought in only when better options were exhausted. Then, 1984 brought Miami Vice, the role that redefined everything. Johnson nearly passed on the audition, out sailing in Florida when his agent called, refusing at first until heated back and forth convinced him to fly to Los Angeles. NBC already knew him from unsuccessful pilots, but executive Brandon Tartikoff remembered him, and that familiarity worked in his favor. Once the show aired, Johnson became a cultural icon, his permanent stubble suggesting a man who slept in his clothes and never shut off, the light-colored blazers with rolled sleeves and missing socks becoming a look men everywhere tried to copy. He trained obsessively and threw himself into shaping Sonny Crockett's personality, and in 1986, at the height of fame, he released the album Heartbeat, performing one of its songs on the show. Meeting Barbra Streisand at a 1987 Christmas party filled with Hollywood royalty led to a very public relationship, the two going official at a heavyweight boxing match within a month. Both were massive stars with strong wills and egos, and Streisand defended him fiercely. But when Johnson reconnected with Melanie Griffith while helping her enter rehab, old emotions resurfaced immediately. Griffith's marriage was collapsing, her addictions worsening, and once it ended, she and Johnson decided to try again. Their bond had never truly broken, only paused, and compared to that pull, his relationship with Streisand faded fast, ending in under a year. Walking down the aisle together for the second time in early 1989, both wearing white at a small, intimate wedding, Don and Melanie looked genuinely happy to those in attendance. Time apart and hard lessons had changed them both, and Melanie made it clear this reunion felt different because they'd stayed connected through everything, bound by something neither could explain. For the first time in years, both were sober and present, careers thriving, but focus shifted toward family, splitting time between Miami and Aspen before settling at his ranch. Charity events filled their calendar, mornings spent jogging or golfing instead of recovering from the night before, a complete reversal from the lives they once lived. Their daughter Dakota arrived on October 4, 1989, making that year one of the most significant in Johnson's life, though at the time no one could have known she'd grow up to become a star herself. Melanie, according to her mother Tippi Hedren, was happier than she'd ever been, finally building the family with the man she'd loved since she was young. Johnson stepped away from Miami Vice that same year, exhausted and creatively spent after living inside Sonny Crockett for so long. The problem was the character didn't walk away from him, and his real life began mirroring the excess even more as he poured money into boats, cars, luxury homes, a private jet, and a sprawling ranch. Despite fame, wealth, and a growing family, he felt deeply unhappy, later admitting all the spending was an attempt to fill an emptiness he didn't know how to confront. Sobriety was never a straight line, and over the years he slipped in and out of old habits, struggling quietly with alcohol and prescription drugs during periods he later described as some of the darkest of his life. Still, his professionalism never wavered, showing up for work on Harley-Davidson and the Marlboro Man in 1991 and starring alongside Melanie in Paradise and Born yesterday. For a while it looked like they'd found balance, but slowly the cracks returned as both changed in different directions. Johnson entered rehab again in 1994, battling alcohol and prescription drugs while rumors swirled about him fathering a child outside the marriage. Melanie filed for divorce that year, and though they briefly paused the process, the marriage officially ended in 1996. She later acknowledged how difficult he could be while admitting how hard it was to imagine life without him, two people, not enemies, but simply growing apart. Meeting schoolteacher Kelly Fleeger in 1999 brought a quieter turn, someone with no interest in Hollywood fame and exactly what he needed. Their marriage on April 29th marked a reset, and Johnson walked away from the excess for good, describing his transformation as spiritual after years spent breaking himself open, searching for something real. 3 children with Kelly, reconciliation with older kids Jesse and Dakota, and watching Dakota rise to fame on her own terms filled him with pride, not because she was famous but because she was fulfilled. Recent reports suggest Johnson and Melanie have grown noticeably close again, not about romance but affection that never faded given their shared history and daughter. Dakota's success pulled them back into the same orbit, spending time together at her Malibu home during family gatherings, and Johnson remains close to Tippi Hedren, recently posting a photo calling her his beautiful co-star. He's been there for Melanie through serious health struggles including skin cancer surgeries and an epilepsy diagnosis that went undiagnosed for years despite repeated warning signs. Sources say if she decides to start dating again, he's willing to help, even playing matchmaker if that's what she wants because her happiness genuinely matters to him. After years of passion, chaos, heartbreak, and reconciliation, they've landed in a place of real peace, no drama or expectations, just mutual respect and lifelong friendship. Not the ending anyone once imagined, but maybe the healthiest chapter they've ever shared.